Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. One thing we've learned about mass immigration over the past couple of years is that all good people support it. Immigration is the ultimate moral litmus test. When a caravan of poor migrants from the third world shows up uninvited on your doorstep, the decent among us step forward to welcome them in. That's commanded by the moral code of cable news and, more importantly, by the poem at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. Only bigots and haters slam the door. That's what they've been telling us in the media now for years. CNN's Jim Acosta has made that point repeatedly. Well, it has finally happened. The caravan has arrived. But here's the funny part. It didn't arrive in our country. It arrived in Mexico, in the border city of Tijuana, just across the fence from San Diego. The people of Tijuana are Mexican citizens, so by definition, they are good people, much better than you are. They're more welcoming and compassionate, less selfish and less American. They must be thrilled by the new arrivals. As immigrants, their new Honduran neighbors will grow their economy and add rich new diversity to their culture. That's what low-skilled immigrants always do. Again, a point that Jim Acosta frequently makes. So are the people of Tijuana grateful for this caravan from Honduras? Fox's William Lajeunesse went there to find out firsthand. Here's what he discovered.
Should this caravan have been stopped at the Guatemala border?
Of course, I agree with that 100%. It should have.
Your country have to be beware of these people because they are people, they are bad people.
Because they don't belong here, they're just migrants, but it's like the same, in the same case, it's like when Mexican migrants going to the U.S., they're undocumented.
You know of incidences here in Tijuana and in other cities that some of these people that are coming into with these caravans are committing crimes. This is not about racism. We don't dislike a certain group of people because they're from a country, one country or another. We are here because our government has not taken control of these, what we call invasion.
Whoa, wait a second. That's not the script we expected at all. The migrants are disruptive. They, quote, don't belong here. Some of them are criminals. It sounds like what they're saying in Tijuana is when Honduras sends its people, it's not sending their best. And that's a racist statement, obviously. We know that because Donald Trump said something like that about Mexico once, and the geniuses on cable news never forgot it. They're still talking about that line years later as evidence of Trump's white supremacy. And yet here you have non-white people in Mexico saying pretty much exactly the same thing. How can that be? Let's check back with Tijuana to make sure we heard that right.
Donald Trump tenía la razón. Es una invasión. Lo que dijo Donald Trump es verdad. Es una invasión.
Donald Trump was right? Wait, how can someone in Mexico say that? Everybody in Mexico hates Trump. He believes in borders. Nobody in Mexico believes in borders. They're better than that. Well, maybe that was just a lone extremist talking, some crazy person who found a microphone and a TV camera. We better check with the elected mayor of Tijuana. If anyone can speak for the people of that city, he can. Here's what the mayor had to say about the migrant caravan.
Ninguna ciudad en el mundo está preparada para recibir esta, si se me permite, esta avalancha, ¿no? Este tsunami.
An avalanche? A tsunami? Note the dehumanizing terms he uses. If this were a liberal arts college in America, the mayor might be suspended for saying that. He'd definitely be in some kind of diversity re-education class by now. If he worked at Google, he'd be fired instantly. But he's not a student or a tech drone. He's the mayor of Tijuana, where people can still say what they think without fear of being denounced by Don Lemon on CNN as a white supremacist. So they do say what they think. And in Tijuana, what they think is that a massive and abrupt demographic change is destabilizing to a society, no matter what the color of the people involved might be. It's particularly destabilizing if you're not rich, and most people in Tijuana are not rich. Even in Mexico, they're wary of ignoring the law completely and treating borders like they don't exist. They know that doesn't end well. Most people know that doesn't end well. The difference is, in Mexico, they can say that out loud. We could learn from that. Enrique Acevedo was an anchor at Univision. He was just in Tijuana. He joins us tonight from Miami, Florida. Enrique, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
I'm confused. We just saw a group of Mexican citizens in Tijuana saying basically the same things that President Trump says, almost to the word, endorsing Trump, are they white supremacists?
Well, you have to understand that unlike human beings, intolerance, hate, and even racism flow freely across borders. And that's what you saw in those interviews. They're not running for president. They're not running for president of the United States either. They are part of a group of around 300 protesters in a city of 1.3 million who, like many others along the way, this caravan, are opposed to their presence in Tijuana. And, you know, the overwhelming majority of people in Tijuana welcome immigrants. It's a city of immigrants.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just back up a little bit? No, it's a big city, for sure. Can I say, hold on, you just said that they're racist, but they're Latino, Spanish-speaking Latinos, attacking other Spanish-speaking Latinos. So where's the racism?
Well, we're not a monolithic community, Tucker. We have people from Central America, from Venezuela, from Colombia, different backgrounds, different ethnicities. And yes, racism exists in Mexico towards Central Americans. It's not new. It's happened through throughout history.
But I'm confused. How is it racist?
Wait, but hold on. Migrants face when they go across Mexico: violence, extortion, and racism.
No, okay, but I'm not quite sure how it's racism if they appear to be of the same race. But moreover, they said, and I think I'm quoting one of the protesters, it's not about racism. This is almost exactly what he said. We want our government to enforce our borders, which is what a lot of people, including me, say frequently in the United States. Maybe, has it occurred to you, maybe it's not just racism? Maybe it's okay to want your government to keep your border intact?
I think we should stop framing this debate about immigration in absolutes. Good, bad, enforcing, not enforcing. The border, as you saw there and as you can see, is enforced. There's border security through Border Patrol, through military members, and through things like drones and ATVs and high-tech surveillance equipment. So we're enforcing the border. We're just getting ready for this large influx of immigrants, which is not a crisis or an invasion. It's just a
I know what the talking points.
I know
what the talking points are. But what's so interesting about these interviews is that they seem to contradict the talking points. So to the people of Tijuana, we can both agree they're probably not white supremacists. I think we can take that as a matter of faith. They seem to think this is a crisis. It's their city. And by the way, their mayor agrees with them. I assume he's not a racist either, or maybe he is. Do you think they have any real concern?
I interviewed the mayor last week, and he walked back some of those statements. He said that all immigrants are welcome in Tijuana, and that he didn't mean any discrimination or harm to the people who were part of the caravan. So, you know, in putting those
I'm sure you bullied him,
context, he was,
as most politically correct media figures do. But before we get to him retracting his statements under pressure from Univision, can we just address the core question, which is, do you think he has any legitimate complaint? Does anybody whose city is overwhelmed by people from another country have any legitimate complaint at all, or is it always bigotry?
Exactly. I was just complaining that we framed the debate on immigration on absolutes. Of course, he has a point. You know, the city is overwhelmed by the presence of these migrants, and governments, you know, all the governments involved should understand this is a humanitarian crisis and start acting like it instead of just having these security measures at the border. You know, again, I've said this 1,000 times. We can spend a little more in the countries where these people are coming from and make a huge difference at the border, or we can keep spending billions of taxpayers' dollars at the border.
Oh, so you figured out? Wait, hold on. So you figured out?
People are coming from.
I'll actually give you airtime. We're live right now. You figured out how to fix Honduras and make it such a thriving country that no one wants to leave? To raise GDP to American levels? How would you do it? Just really quick, how would you do that?
I'm not coming up with a new idea. We've done this before with USAID, and it's worked. We just need more resources focused there instead of at the border.
It's been a miserable failure.
Instead of spending $100 billion over the past decade on border security, we could have used some of that money on programs that USAID has said is working.
So which program, hold on. I know what the talking point is. Let's get specific. I'm giving you a chance live on TV.
Yes.
Which program specifically would have made the economy of Honduras so strong that no one would want to leave and come to the United States?
So USAID, for example, is working on 2 of the communities with the highest murder rate in Honduras. Throughout the last 2 or 3 years, with this program, they've been able to reduce violence there and therefore reduce the amount of people who were leaving that town. These are only 2 examples.
So why do we have a caravan of Hondurans coming if the USAID
because violence is not the only factor. We have other factors.
But I'm just saying, what's the problem? Because I hear that a lot from dumb people on, I think Don Lemon said that on CNN. We should spend more money in these countries. Has there ever been a program that has changed a country in the third world and made it so appealing that no one wanted to come to the United States? I don't think there is a program like that, is there?
But again, absolutes, no one. It's impossible to just have a program for everyone. Violence is a factor. Poverty is a factor. Even climate now is becoming a factor. We saw a crew from the Weather Channel with the caravan. They were, tracking the journey of a group of immigrants from Honduras, where 90% of crops have collapsed. John Carlos Frey, their correspondent, was telling me how the UN has declared Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, a region with famine.
But what about the people? Look,
factors.
I feel sorry for the people in the caravan, and I understand why they want to come to the United States. I love this country. I appreciate their good tasting countries.
And
what
that's
about
the great thing,
people
Tucker. Maybe we should be worried
what about everybody
that people
else?
Want to come in. We should start worrying when people don't want to come to the United States.
That's going to happen soon if we don't get a real border. So, because we'll be like Honduras. So why would people want to move here? I mean, honestly, my question is, what about the people who live in the United States, or in this case, who live in Tijuana? Do they have any legitimate reason not to want? They do have a legitimate reason.
By all means, of course. You understand that, and we've discussed this in the past. Undocumented immigration is not a desirable outcome for any of the parties involved.
I'm glad you're admitting
these people live in their homes, and the people who
you don't have to be a racist to be against
but there are better ways, more humane, compassionate, and common sense laws that we could have instead of what we're doing with family separation,
I don't really think it's our fault,
and these measures that really don't make any difference.
Yeah, I'm not going to accept blame for the disaster that is Central America. Sorry. Enrique, thank you, though. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Brandon Judd is the president of National Border Patrol Council. He joins us tonight. So, Brandon, you're seeing what's going on in Tijuana right now. Do you see that? And I feel sorry for the people of Tijuana. I feel sorry for the people in the migrant caravan. But do you think the chaos that we're watching on the screen in Tijuana vindicates the position of Americans who say, this kind of caravan can destabilize your society pretty quickly?
Well, they're absolutely correct. I mean, all you have to do is look at what just happened at our port of entry, at the San Ysidro port of entry today. This migrant caravan, they were tired of waiting in line, waiting for their turn to claim asylum, and they tried to shut down the entire port of entry by rushing the port of entry. Look, if it wasn't for President Trump and him sending the troops to the border, doing what he did, we would have ultimately shut down a port of entry that generates millions of dollars for the American economy per year, and we just can't have that. That's the lawlessness that we're facing. But Tucker, I just walked out of a meeting with the president, and to see him and to see the things that he's trying to do to secure our borders, it's something that gives me great hope, because he was left with a mess from his predecessors. And this is a president that once and for all is trying to end this debate and trying to secure the border for the American public. And for that, everybody should be grateful.
I mean, people have differing views on what we should do about immigration. I think it's okay to have differing views about anything, really. But do you think it's helpful to shut down the conversation again and again and again by attacking people who disagree with you as bigots, as moral monsters?
No, again, I mean, all you have to do is look at me. Unfortunately, I'm follically challenged. So am I automatically a bigot because I don't have hair? The truth is absolutely not. I adopted 2 children of Hispanic descent. We're not bigots simply because we want border security. What we want is we want our children to be able to be raised in a country that believes in laws, that makes us free and protects us.
Well, of course. And the people of Tijuana want the same thing. Why wouldn't they?
Yes, they do.
Brandon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, a Democratic member of Congress says it's time to ban millions of guns. Take them from you by force, and if you don't like it, the government may kill you. For real. That's next. Well, after retaking the House of Representatives, congressional Democrats are feeling newly emboldened about rolling back the Second Amendment. Earlier this year, California Democrat Eric Swalwell called for confiscating all so-called assault weapons, scary-looking rifles, and bringing criminal charges against anyone who resisted. We're not misquoting that. He wrote it in an op-ed in USA Today. Then just days ago on Twitter, one critic said this would provoke armed resistance against the government, because obviously it would. Swalwell responded this way, quote, "It would be a short war, my friend. The government has nukes." In other words, obey or we'll kill you. Jumaane Williams is a New York City councilman who joins us tonight. Mr. Williams, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So there's something admirable about the straightforwardness from our old friend, Congressman Swalwell. if you don't obey, we'll just kill you. What do you think of that?
Come on, Tucker, we all have to get to a place where we can have a conversation about what's happening in this country, and have a respectable one. So,
do you think threatening people with violence is a good way to get to that
no,
place?
I don't think that's the good way to have a conversation, nor do I think having a conversation about guns not being part of the problem is a good way to have a conversation. So we should start with guns are a part of the problem and figure out how to deal with it.
Okay, but when a sitting U.S. and by the way, we know Swalwell very well.
Sure.
I personally like him. We asked him to come on to respond directly. I should say that. But when a sitting U.S. congressman says, if you don't like it, if you're going to resist in any way, we'll just drop your nuclear weapons on you. We don't even threaten our martial enemies with that. I mean, that's a bit much, no?
Well, first I was remiss, prayers and peace of comfort for the victims of the Chicago mass shooting. But like the mother of a victim that happened in California who said she was tired of prayers, she wanted action. We have to have actionable items. And so I don't consider nukes on people who have guns an actionable item. But there are actionable items. And
so you are the moderate for the first time.
I don't know about the moderate.
Well, you're against killing American citizens. So that puts you in the moderate category. So let me just ask you this. So here's my confusion. I have no problem trying to disarm people who are threatening. The problem I have with gun confiscation is that it punishes people like me who pose no threat at all, and many millions of other Americans who have no criminal record, no intent to harm anybody, want guns for self-defense. And it says to them, you're a criminal now because you have a gun that we think
you have jumped to confiscation.
Well, but no, Eric Swalwell, who's a member of the Intel Committee, is a
but we should have
member.
a conversation about, one, is there an issue with guns in this country, and what do we do with that? And the actionable items are quite clear. One, we can address loopholes in assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Two, we can deal with dealers who have been unscrupulous.
Okay.
And three, we can begin to treat guns like we do cars. That's just on the demand side.
But okay.
I mean, on the supply
I'll address
side.
that. I mean,
has to be on the demand
you
side
have
as
members
well.
of Congress, at least one prominent member of Congress, saying we're going to take your guns away by force. Okay. So apparently you're not calling for that, though. We both know you're secretly for that. But we
don't both know that, but okay.
Okay, but I believe you're for that. I believe
you
many
can believe what you like. I'm here to have a discussion.
Are you for that?
On the issue? No. Listen,
Good.
we should have a discussion.
Okay, then let's talk about magazines.
Sure.
You say high capacity. I think that means any more than 10. If I have a magazine that has 15-round capacity, why is it a threat to anyone?
We have to start with, and I'm repeating this again, with everyone agreeing that guns and the access to guns are an issue in this country.
Well, how about this? I don't agree with that.
You do not.
I think a gun is a tool, and in the hands, like any tool, in the hands of someone with malintent, it's very dangerous.
So I
don't have
this.
malintent. So would I be forced to give up any magazines that I had that exceeded
I
capacity?
will say this. If a hammer killed 33,000 Americans every single year, we would be screaming and yelling, let's regulate hammers. Guns are only made for killing. What I'm saying is let's at least treat guns how we treat vehicles.
But you're speaking theoretically, and I want to speak tangibly.
I'm speaking specifically.
So there are millions upon millions of so-called high-capacity magazines out there. They're in circulation, tens of millions of them. What do we do with those?
So I mentioned three things. I mentioned dealing with the high-capacity magazines and the assault weapons. I mentioned the loopholes of gun dealers.
Stick with the magazines.
But I mentioned also treating guns like we treat vehicles. That's just on the supply side.
Okay, but I'm sorry to press you for specifics, but since this is what you do, let me press you. There are tens of millions of magazines that fit more than 10 rounds in circulation. Normal people with no criminal records own them. What do we do with them?
I tell you what, in New York City, we're the safest city of guns we've been since 1951. I've been a leading voice in dealing with gun violence in New York City.
Oh, so you won't answer the question. That's why nobody trusts the gun people, because we know that you're gun grabbers because you're not straightforward.
Again, part of the gun violence problem. I asked you this last time. You wouldn't answer.
What would you do with the magazines?
But
is that not a fair question?
But no, we have to start from someplace where we all agree.
No,
but you want to die? We absolutely do.
Tell me what you think, and then maybe you can convince me.
The way you start, we'll never have a conversation. So I want to start from having a conversation.
You need to lie to me first, and then, you're not going to answer a straightforward adult question.
Are you?
I'm not lying at all.
No, I'm asking, are you going to answer a straightforward question?
I'll answer any question.
Are guns a part of gun violence in this country?
Well, of course, they're the tool that is used very often to commit violence.
So we have to start from that point. Finally,
that's fine.
Thank you for agreeing. Thank you for agreeing.
If I have a high-capacity magazine in my possession, your definition of high capacity, and I don't want to give it up, will you take it from me?
So let's take that one off the table.
Why?
What about the other two?
Wait, why are we
because
taking
you
that?
like
Hold
to
on.
stick on the one that will prevent the
I'd like to
conversation
ask
from
very
going forward.
simple factual
no,
questions
I mentioned
and
three
see
things.
if you're straightforward enough
I mentioned
to answer
three
them.
things. And so the way this happens in government, people present things
But why won't
and we
you
figure
answer
out
that?
because you want to get to a point where people will reject any conversation about dealing with guns.
But I think all of our
I
viewers
want to get
know
to
where
a
you
point.
stand.
No,
the
they
answer
don't.
is, of course, I'm going to take it from you and
no,
punish
they don't.
you if you don't give it to me.
The fact of the matter is we have less than 5% of the population, and we own over half of civilian guns and 30% of mass shootings. But thank you for agreeing that guns are a part of gun violent problems in America. Next time we have a conversation,
I
we can get to the
always
fix.
say what I think. In contrast
Absolutely.
to you, I will say.
I always
Mr.
say what I
Councilman,
think as well.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having
Appreciate
me.
it. Colion Noir is an NRA TV host, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Noir, thanks a lot very much for coming on. So I'm starting to get the sense that confiscation, clearly the goal, because there's no other goal that makes sense. You can't, if there are tens of millions of so-called assault rifles in circulation and many tens of millions of these so-called high-capacity magazines, you're never going to solve the problem that the left believes is responsible for gun violence unless you take those away, right?
It's the only logical conclusion. Because if you think about it, if you start with gun control based around the idea of restricting or taking something away, if we got rid of, let's say we got rid of the AR-15s, they account for less than 3% of gun deaths in this country. Right. So let's say we get an assault weapons ban, right? At that point, all right, let's say another shooting happens like the one we just had recently in California where he used a handgun. Then they'll be telling us, you know what, that didn't work, so now we need to do something more strict, which is ban firearms. So inevitably, it's always a race to total and complete confiscation, but they never want to admit that. They want to act like they're being reasonable and say, no. We just want to get rid of the big scary guns. But it's like, the big scary guns aren't the problem. They account for less than 3% of gun deaths. But 80% of gun deaths in this country are committed by way of handguns. So if you honestly believe that the tool is the issue, why aren't you addressing the handguns?
Well, that's a very smart point, and one that I plan to bring up next time we speak to someone on the other side. But my question's even broader than that. Why, in a chaotic and increasingly chaotic world, the one that we live in, would you want to disarm normal law-abiding people? What threat do they pose?
I think there are two different dynamics going on here. I think there's one dynamic which is composed of people who are just generally ignorant about firearms. And then I think there's another dynamic of people who are generally have an agenda to gain more control and to push the idea of reliance on government. And it sounds conspiratorial, but it's not. Because if I'm self-reliant in my ability to protect myself, my natural inclination is not to depend on the government to be there when something goes wrong. Right. And you can't push the necessity of government if you have a populace of people who understand and embrace the idea of self-reliance, especially when it comes to protecting your life and your family. And so the people on the side of the... Go ahead.
No, I was just complimenting the point. It's deep. So what you're saying is that many people on the periphery of the conversation just haven't really thought about it, but the people who driving the conversation who have thought about it do have an agenda.
Absolutely. Huh. It's one of those things where... go ahead, sorry.
No, that's it. I'm just impressed. I hope you'll come back and join us again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Nancy Pelosi led the Democrats back to a majority in the House, almost 40 seats, but now she could be removed from power anyway by her fellow Democrats. That smells like sexism. We're sounding the alarm right now. We're going to talk to Richard Goodstein about it after the break. Democrats just retook control of the House of Representatives after 8 years, and the rest of us are waiting to see what they will do with their new political power. We know the Democrats despise the president. They've mentioned that. But what are they for? What's their organizing principle? Time friend and defender of Bill Clinton, Harvey Weinstein, and Anthony Weiner. Gillibrand has recently been reborn as a fire-breathing fundamentalist preacher. Here's a selection from a few of her sermons over just the past week.
This country was founded on some basic moral principles, that we have a moral compass as a nation. Our morality as a country is literally on a knife's edge.
For me, it's really a moral question. For me, it's very much a moral question. I've been called to fight as hard as I possibly can to restore that moral integrity, that moral decency.
For me, it's a moral question. Keep in mind the hand gesture. Keep in mind also that Senator Gillibrand isn't just fighting for moral integrity and moral decency. She says she has been called to fight for these things. You know who called her, don't you? It wasn't her friend Anthony Weiner from the prison payphone. Nope. It was God himself. He calls Senator Gillibrand directly. He's got her cell. That's how close they are. Remember when Democrats used to say they worried about a theocracy? Who knew they'd try to start their own? Well, after 8 years, the minority Democrats are, as we said, back in control of the House. They may soon have a new leader of the House, the Speaker. A growing number of Democrats publicly voicing opposition to electing Nancy Pelosi to that job for another time.
One of the things that I talked about frequently on the campaign trail was the need to have new voices in Congress, the need to turn a new page.
We answer that call for new leadership by reinstalling the same status quo establishment leadership that we've had in this party since 2006, then we're letting down the American people.
I think once we show that the leader can't get to 218, you're going to see other people throw their hat in the ring, too.
Now, there are a lot of ways Pelosi could respond to that. The most obvious is by saying, look, we just won 39 seats in the House. Possibly we're going to get to 40. I did that. She could say that. Instead, she's crying sexism.
You'd have to ask those people what their motivation is. I think of the 17, it's mostly like 14 men who are on that letter. If, in fact, there is any misogyny involved in it, it's their problem, not mine.
Men. Toxic masculinity in the Democratic Party. Richard Goodstein, a living expert on this. No, just kidding. But he is an attorney and former advisor to both Bill and Hillary Clinton, joins us tonight. I didn't know, Richard, there was that much sexism in the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi says there is. What are you guys going to do about it?
Yeah, I was sorry to see Nancy Pelosi attribute these rebels to misogyny and sexism. I actually think she knows that's not what it is, that when Conor Lamb was running for election initially in that district in Pennsylvania that went for Trump by 20, and all these ads were being run saying he was just going to be a puppet of Nancy Pelosi's, guess what? He said he wasn't going to vote for her if he got elected to be Speaker. And you know what? He's not. It's not because she's a woman. It's because he made a commitment to his constituents, because he basically thought that's what he needed to do to, A, get elected, and B, what he thought was right, that the Democrats needed to turn the page.
Oh, so he just wants the most qualified candidate, irrespective of her sex. I can't let you off the hook that fast, Richard. These are the rules that you guys wrote, and the rules are as follows. The most important thing about you is how you're born. Your sex, your race, your sexual preference, your innate qualities, your DNA. That's what defines you. It's called identity, Richard. I don't know if you knew that. In the intersectional world that you guys made, you can't just say, oh, we found a better candidate. You're blowing off a woman. 14 men are doing that. Is there an investigation into institutional sexism in the Democratic Party? I'm dead serious. Why wouldn't there be?
Yeah, here's what's worse. The problem for the Democrats, and I'm serious about this, it's nothing to do with identity. It's with seniority. And they, I think, respect the fact that when Newt Gingrich came in, that the Republicans did something different. They basically said, we're going to put the sort of younger, vital, able, competent people in our leadership position at committee chairs, and Paul Ryan's a young guy. And I think that's something that, frankly, a lot of Democrats wish Democrats could figure out a way to embrace. It has nothing to do with Nancy Pelosi's gender or Congressman Clyburn's race. It has to do with the fact that, yes.
But everything outside the Democratic Party's leadership structure, according to Democrats, has to do with race and gender. Everything. I mean, every time I flip on the tube, there's some moron tugging his chin and saying, I don't see enough people of whatever in this picture. I mean, that is the most basic Democratic talking point. But we're not supposed to apply it to the Democratic leadership because why?
Well, again, I think the Democratic talking points are about health care, about making sure that tax cuts go to working people, about gun background checks, about infrastructure. That's what Democrats are united around.
Can they stop lecturing the rest of us about racism and sexism, since clearly they don't hold themselves to the same standard? That's all I'm asking for. By the way, I agree with, I hope the Democrats talk about health care. I think it's an important topic. I think we'd all benefit from that. Can they lay off the race and gender stuff a little bit, though, since they're obviously not playing by those rules?
Again, Republicans put Nancy Pelosi on the ballot, all these ads they ran against her. Donald Trump said himself he was on the ballot. And as you just said, Democrats picked up 39 seats, having nothing to do with race or gender, having to do with sort of a belief that, A, they needed an agenda that the Democrats supported, and B, frankly, to put a check on Donald Trump.
Wait, hold on. You just lied over it. Nothing to do with race or gender. Really? I mean, or gender, how do we know that? So here's what I know. Here are the stark facts of the case. Donald Trump is for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, but Seth Moulton is not. Trump is comfortable with a strong woman in power. Seth Moulton clearly isn't. Seth Moulton looks like a sexist to me by this measure, and Donald Trump seems very enlightened. I mean, that's what I say. Why do you see something different?
You're assigning weight to what Donald Trump says. I think most Democrats, and frankly, most people in the country anymore, don't. With all due respect, they just don't assign weight to what he says.
Wait, he says
because
he's
so
for
many times he
Pelosi.
says
Okay, how
things
about
that
this?
aren't true.
I'm for Pelosi. Look, I'm just using the rules that you guys made up and enforce with Germanic efficiency on the rest of us. That's all I'm doing. And how does it feel? It feels bad because it's unfair and stupid, isn't it? Can you just admit that? It's unfair and stupid, and the rest of us have to live like this in fear. And maybe you guys should live that way just for a day to see what it feels like. Do you see what I mean?
Well, again, you're ascribing things that I think Democrats and the public generally, they wouldn't have voted in the Democrats to run the House position, Tucker.
I guess. I don't know why they did. Richard Gutstein, great to see you. Thank you. I don't
My
think
pleasure.
you're a sexist. I was just kidding.
Thank you.
Well, the new face, the Democratic Party, just endorsed a plot to make the party even more liberal than it already is. Mark Stein joins us to assess what happened. Stay tuned. Newly elected Democratic Congresswoman and Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has quickly become one of the most famous Democrats in America at the age of 28. And sometimes, occasionally, it is clear that she's only 28, as here.
I would love to get inaugurated January 3rd, January 4th. We're signing health care, we're signing this, we're decarcerating our society.
And if we work our butts off to make sure that we take back all three chambers of Congress, all three chambers of government, the presidency, the Senate, and the House in 2020.
We look at these figures and we say, oh, unemployment is low, everything is fine, right? Well, unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs.
Some missteps, but that does not mean she's not popular. She's very popular among the Democratic base, and she's determined to remake the party along very different lines. She just gave support to Justice Democrats. That's a group plotting primary challenges to Democrats they deem insufficiently progressive and insufficiently diverse. Author and columnist Mark Stein joins us, who I should say, in an editorial comment, is one of the single smartest people I've ever met in my life and who never went to college. So if you're thinking about whether to send your brilliant son or daughter off to school at 70 grand a year, look at Mark Stein and reconsider. Anyway, I couldn't control myself.
No, drop out at fifth grade, America. You'll thank me for it.
There's something to it. Anyway, that's another show. So the Democratic Party has a reckoning, it seems to me. They need to figure out who they are and what they stand for. What are they going to decide? Where are they going?
Well, I think they're going with Miss Ocasio-Cortez. You were talking with our pal Richard about identity politics, and there's actually something absurd about it. We had a fellow called O'Rourke pretending to be Hispanic, some kind of Hispanic.
You're talking about Beto.
Beto or Hockey. Pretending to be Hispanic. And essentially what you have permanently is extremely old white people.
Running against an actual Hispanic guy named Ted.
Yeah, but if you look at, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Bernie Sanders, Dianne Feinstein, and they're all about, as you said, they're all about the identity politics. They're saying, oh yeah, if you're a Muslim or transgender, then Joe Biden is your guy, or Bernie Sanders is your guy. And at a certain point, these identity groups, like the youngest Congresswoman, decide, no, well, wait a minute, we'd like a piece of the action.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I have mixed feelings about this. I don't think that you should elevate people on the basis of irrelevant criteria like their race of all things. I think it's immoral, actually, no matter what the race is. On the other hand, they wrote these rules. And they don't want to live by these rules, but they want everyone else to live by the rules.
And they're being taken out by people who took them at their word, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, we can laugh at her. I thought that. I don't even know what 3 chambers of government mean. Well, I do, because it's like if you're an immigrant, it's in the test. I think the 3 branches of government are the special counsel, the Broward County Elections Office, and the judge who gave Jim Acosta his press pass back. They're the 3 branches of government. But what's more interesting is not that she doesn't know that, but that millions and millions of Democrat voters don't think it's actually essential to know that. They're way beyond that now, and they have a new view of America, and she represents it. And fellas like Joe Biden and Bernie, well, Bernie does, but fellas like Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary, they really don't.
They're in for a real reckoning. I think they're
yeah.
about to find out that their dumb ideas have consequences that are going to hurt them. Mark Stein, great to see you as
Yeah,
always.
and you, Tucker.
A rare in-person setting. Who will be filling in, by the way, who's going to be hosting this show while I'm gone, and we're always grateful that he does.
Yeah, have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Up next, there's new scientific evidence of what you already knew. Facebook is making Americans miserable, depressed. What can we do about that? I'll tell you after the break.